When the lawyer read Grandpa's will, the room fell silent except for my cousin Jake's barely suppressed snickering. My aunts and uncles had inherited the valuable parts of the farm, 800 acres of prime farmland, the modern equipment worth $500,000, and the profitable cattle operation that generated steady income year-round. I got a rusty 1952 John Deere Model B tractor that had been sitting in the corner of the barn for the past 20 years, covered in dust and slowly deteriorating. The engine was seized, the tires were flat, and mice had built nests in the seat cushions. It was, by any reasonable measure, worthless scrap metal. "Well, Tommy," Jake said with a grin, "looks like Grandpa saved the best for last." The rest of the family joined in the laughter. They all knew I was the black sheep, the grandson who had never shown interest in farming, who had gone to college to study engineering instead of agriculture, and who had spent the last 10 years working in the city instead of helping with the family operation. "Maybe you can sell it for parts," my Aunt Sarah suggested, though her tone made it clear she thought even that was optimistic. I'd always had a complicated relationship with Grandpa. He'd been disappointed when I chose engineering over farming, and we'd grown distant over the years as I built a life away from the rural community where he'd spent his entire existence. I'd assumed his final gift was either a mistake or a gentle rebuke for abandoning the family's agricultural heritage. But as I looked at that old tractor, something stirred in my memory. I remembered riding on Grandpa's lap as a small child, helping him steer while he operated the clutch and throttle. He'd called it his special machine and had always maintained it with obsessive care, even after buying newer equipment. Why would he leave me something he'd once treasured, and why had he let it deteriorate so badly in his final years? Chapter 2. The decision to restore against everyone's advice and my own better judgment. I decided to restore the old John Deere. My family thought I'd lost my mind. Why spend time and money on a machine that would never be worth more than a few $1,000s, even in perfect condition? You could buy a running tractor for less than it'll cost to restore that piece of junk, Jake pointed out during one of his visits to mock my progress. But something about the project appealed to me. After years of working with computer systems and digital interfaces, there was something satisfying about the mechanical simplicity of the old tractor. Every part had a clear purpose, and every problem had a solution that could be achieved with basic tools and determination. I started by researching the tractor's history and specifications. The Model B had been John Deere's most popular small tractor in the 1950s, known for its reliability and versatility. This particular machine had been built in 1952, making it nearly 70 years old, but the basic design was so robust that many were still in regular use on small farms. I found online forums dedicated to vintage tractor restoration, where enthusiasts shared advice, parts sources, and encouragement for projects like mine. The community was welcoming and knowledgeable, offering guidance that would have taken me years to figure out on my own. The first step was assessing the extent of the damage and creating a restoration plan. The engine was seized, but that was often repairable with patience and the right techniques. The hydraulic system needed complete rebuilding, and most of the electrical components would need replacement. I set up a workshop in one corner of the barn, organizing tools and creating a clean workspace where I could disassemble and rebuild each system methodically. The project would take months, but I had time in the evenings and weekends to work on it slowly and carefully. As I began taking the tractor apart, I started finding things that suggested this machine had been more important to Grandpa than anyone realized. Chapter 3. Hidden Treasures. As I disassembled the tractor, I began finding items that Grandpa had hidden in various compartments and cavities throughout the machine. Wrapped in oilcloth and tucked into the air filter housing, I found a small metal box containing old photographs and what appeared to be land deeds. The photographs showed Grandpa as a young man, standing next to the same tractor when it was brand new. But he wasn't alone in the pictures. There was a young woman I didn't recognize, beautiful and smiling, wearing a dress that suggested the 1950s. The land deeds were even more intriguing. They showed ownership of properties I'd never heard Grandpa mention, scattered across 3 different counties and totaling nearly 500 acres. According to the documents, these properties had been purchased between 1952 and 1955, around the same time he'd bought the tractor. I found more hidden items as I continued the restoration. Inside the fuel tank, wrapped in waterproof material, were letters written in a woman's handwriting. The transmission housing contained a small jewelry box with a wedding ring that was clearly too small for Grandpa's large hands. Each discovery raised more questions about Grandpa's past and the significance of this particular tractor. Why had he used it as a hiding place for these personal items? And who was the woman in the photographs? I decided to ask my father about the pictures, but his reaction was unexpected. He studied the photographs with a puzzled expression, then shook his head slowly. "I've never seen these before," he said, "and I don't recognize the woman. Your grandfather never mentioned owning other properties, and I thought I knew everything about his business dealings." The mystery deepened when I showed the documents to my Aunt Sarah, who had handled Grandpa's finances in his later years. She was equally baffled by the land deeds and had no knowledge of the properties they described. "These properties aren't mentioned in his will or any of his financial records," she said. "If he really owned this land, where is it now?" Chapter 4. The research begins. Determined to solve the mystery, I began researching the properties mentioned in the hidden land deeds. The county courthouse records confirmed that Grandpa had indeed purchased the properties in the 1950s, but the trail went cold after that. There were no records of him selling the land, yet it wasn't included in his estate. The woman in the photographs remained equally mysterious. I showed the pictures to elderly neighbors who had known Grandpa for decades, but none of them recognized her. It was as if she had been completely erased from his history. The letters I'd found in the fuel tank provided some clues, though they raised as many questions as they answered. They were love letters, written to "My dearest Robert" and signed "Forever yours, Elizabeth." May. The letters spoke of secret meetings, shared dreams, and plans for a future together. But the letters also contained references to obstacles and disapproval from both families. Elizabeth wrote about pressure to end their relationship and marry someone more suitable. The final letter in the collection was heartbreaking. A goodbye note explaining that she couldn't fight her family's expectations any longer. "I will always love you," she'd written, "but I have to do what's expected of me. Please don't try to find me. Remember me as I was, and know that our time together was the happiest of my life." The letter was dated October 15, 1955, just 3 months before Grandpa married my grandmother in January 1956. I began to understand that the tractor had been more than just a farming implement to Grandpa. It had been a repository for memories of a love affair that had ended in heartbreak, a secret he'd carried for over 60 years. But I still didn't understand why he'd left the tractor to me, or what had happened to the properties Elizabeth had helped him purchase during their brief relationship. The restoration work continued as I searched for answers, each repaired component bringing the old machine closer to life while revealing more about its hidden history. Chapter 5. The running engine. After 3 months of careful work, I was finally ready to attempt starting the engine. I'd rebuilt the carburetor, replaced the spark plugs, and freed up the seized pistons through patient application of penetrating oil and gentle persuasion. The moment of truth came on a crisp Saturday morning in November. I'd invited my father to witness the first start attempt, partly because I wanted someone there to share the moment, and partly because I hoped the running engine might trigger some memories about the tractor's significance. I set the choke, primed the carburetor, and pulled the starter rope. The engine turned over slowly, coughed once, then fell silent. I adjusted the settings and tried again. This time, the engine caught and ran for a few seconds before dying. On the third attempt, the old John Deere roared to life with a sound that was both mechanical and musical. The exhaust stack puffed black smoke for a moment, then settled into a steady rhythm that spoke of properly tuned cylinders and balanced components. My father's reaction was immediate and unexpected. Tears began streaming down his face as he listened to the engine, and his expression showed recognition and understanding that hadn't been there before. "I remember that sound," he said quietly. "Your grandfather used to start this tractor every Sunday morning, even when he didn't need to use it. He'd let it run for exactly 10 minutes, then shut it off and go back to the house." "Why would he do that?" "I never understood it at the time," my father continued, "but now I think he was keeping it ready for something, or someone." As the engine continued to run, I noticed something else. Hidden beneath the seat, activated by the engine's vibration, was a small metal plate that had been invisible when the tractor was silent. Etched into the plate were coordinates, latitude and longitude numbers that would pinpoint a specific location. The tractor wasn't just a repository for memories, it was a map designed to lead someone to a specific place when the engine was running. I shut off the engine and immediately began planning a trip to investigate the coordinates. Chapter 6. Following the coordinates. The coordinates led to a remote section of farmland, about 40 miles from Grandpa's property, in an area I'd never visited. According to my GPS, the location was in the middle of what appeared to be an active cornfield, with no buildings or obvious landmarks nearby. I drove out there on a Sunday afternoon, bringing a metal detector and some basic digging tools in case I needed to search for buried items. The landowner, an elderly farmer named Henry Walsh, was working in his yard when I arrived and was curious about my interest in his property. "You're Robert Thompson's grandson," he said when I introduced myself. "I knew your grandfather well. Good man. Sorry for your loss." When I explained about the coordinates and asked permission to search his field, Henry's expression changed. He studied me carefully, as if trying to decide whether to trust me with something important. "Your grandfather asked me to watch for someone who might come looking for something in that field," he said finally. "He said if anyone ever showed up with the right information, I should help them find what they were looking for." Henry led me to the exact spot, indicated by the coordinates, where a large oak tree stood at the edge of the field. The tree was old enough to have been there in the 1950s, and at its base I could see evidence of disturbed soil that had been carefully concealed. "He buried something here about 60 years ago," Henry explained. "Asked me to keep an eye on the spot and make sure nobody disturbed it. He said someday someone from his family would come looking for it." We dug carefully around the base of the tree, and about 3 feet down, we found a metal box similar to the ones I'd discovered in the tractor. This one was larger and had been sealed with wax to protect its contents from moisture. Inside the box were more photographs, additional land deeds, and a thick envelope addressed to the person who restored my tractor. The envelope contained a letter from Grandpa that explained everything. Chapter 7. Grandpa's Secret. Grandpa's letter revealed a story of love, loss, and sacrifice that no one in the family had ever suspected. Elizabeth hadn't just been a girlfriend, she'd been the love of his life, and they'd been secretly engaged to be married. "Elizabeth and I met in 1952, the letter began, and we knew immediately that we were meant to be together. But her family disapproved of our relationship because I was just a farmer's son with no prospects, while she came from a wealthy family that expected her to marry someone from their social circle." The letter went on to explain that Elizabeth had defied her family's wishes and agreed to elope with Grandpa. They'd used her inheritance money to purchase the properties mentioned in the land deeds, planning to start their own farm, far from both families' interference. "We bought the tractor together," Grandpa wrote. "It was going to be the foundation of our new life. Elizabeth loved that machine almost as much as I did. She learned to drive it and helped me plan how we'd use it to work our land. But their plans had been discovered by Elizabeth's family, who had threatened to disown her completely if she went through with the marriage. Faced with losing everything she'd known, Elizabeth had made the heartbreaking decision to end their relationship and marry the man her family had chosen for her. She gave me back the engagement ring and asked me to keep the properties we'd bought together," the letter continued. She said she wanted me to build the life we'd planned, even if she couldn't be part of it, but I couldn't bear to farm that land without her. So I buried the deeds and tried to forget they existed. Grandpa had married my grandmother 3 months later, but he'd never forgotten Elizabeth or the dreams they'd shared. The tractor had become a memorial to their lost love, carefully maintained but never used for its intended purpose. "I'm leaving the tractor to you," the letter concluded, "because you're the only one in the family who has the skills to restore it and the curiosity to discover its secrets. The properties are yours now. Use them to build something beautiful." Until, Chapter 8, The Hidden Fortune. The land deeds in the buried box revealed that I'd inherited nearly 500 acres of prime farmland, strategically located near growing suburban areas. The properties that Elizabeth and Grandpa had purchased for a few $1,000s in the 1950s were now worth millions, but the financial value was just the beginning. As I researched each property, I discovered that Grandpa had been quietly paying taxes on them for over 60 years, maintaining clear title even though he'd never developed or farmed the land. Some of the properties contained valuable mineral rights, including natural gas deposits that were currently being leased to energy companies. Others were located in areas that had been designated for future development, making them extremely attractive to commercial and residential developers. The property where I'd found the buried box was particularly valuable. Henry Walsh explained that he'd been leasing it from an anonymous owner for decades, paying rent to a property management company that had never revealed the actual landowner's identity. "I always wondered who owned this land," Henry said. "The rent was always fair, and the lease terms were generous. Now I understand why. Your grandfather was making sure the land was well cared for while he waited for the right time to reveal its existence." I spent the next several weeks meeting with lawyers, accountants, and real estate professionals to understand the full scope of what I'd inherited. The properties were all in excellent condition, with clear titles and no outstanding debts or liens. But more importantly, I began to understand Grandpa's long-term strategy. He hadn't just been preserving the land, he'd been positioning it for maximum benefit to future generations. The properties were located in areas that were experiencing steady growth and development, making them increasingly valuable over time. The tractor restoration had been more than just a mechanical project. It had been the key to unlocking a family legacy that would provide financial security for generations to come. Chapter 9, Elizabeth's Legacy. As I delved deeper into the property's histories, I discovered that Elizabeth's influence extended far beyond the original purchases. Through the property management company that had been handling the leases, she had been quietly contributing to the property's maintenance and development for over 60 years. The management company's records showed regular payments from an account controlled by Elizabeth Morrison Walsh. She had married the man her family had chosen, but she'd never forgotten her love for Grandpa or their shared dreams. Elizabeth had died just 5 years earlier, but her will contained provisions that transferred her share of the property management responsibilities to whoever inherited the land from Grandpa. She had been waiting for this moment, knowing that eventually someone from his family would discover the secret they'd shared. I found a letter from Elizabeth among the management company's files, written shortly before her death and addressed to Robert's heir. The letter was both heartbreaking and inspiring, revealing a woman who had spent her entire life honoring a love that had been denied by circumstances beyond their control. "I never stopped loving your grandfather," she wrote, "but I learned to love the life I was given instead of mourning the life I couldn't have. I hope you'll use this land to build something that honors both the dreams we shared and the reality we had to accept." Elizabeth's letter went on to explain that she had used her considerable wealth and influence to ensure that the properties remained viable and valuable. She had funded infrastructure improvements, negotiated favorable lease agreements, and even influenced local zoning decisions to protect the land's long-term value. "Your grandfather gave me the greatest gift of my life," she concluded. even though we couldn't share it together. Now I'm giving that gift to you. Use it wisely, and remember that love doesn't always look the way we expect it to. I realized that the restored tractor wasn't just a memorial to lost love. It was a symbol of enduring love that had found ways to flourish despite impossible circumstances. Chapter 10. The Family Revelation. When I finally revealed the truth about my inheritance to the family, their reactions ranged from amazement to embarrassment about how they'd treated me during the will reading. The worthless tractor had led to a discovery that dwarfed the value of everything else in Grandpa's estate. My father was particularly moved by the story of Grandpa's secret love affair and the sacrifice both he and Elizabeth had made to honor their family's expectations while preserving their shared dreams for future generations. "I always wondered why your grandfather seemed sad sometimes," he said. "Now I understand that he was carrying the weight of a love story that he could never share with anyone." Jake, who had mocked my inheritance so mercilessly, was now eager to help with managing the newly discovered properties, but I had different plans for the land and the wealth it represented. Working with lawyers and financial advisors, I established a foundation that would use the property's income to support young farmers and rural entrepreneurs. The foundation would provide low-interest loans, technical assistance, and mentorship programs that would help the next generation build successful agricultural businesses. I also decided to restore the original farmhouse on one of the properties, creating a retreat center where young farmers could come to learn sustainable agriculture techniques and develop business plans for their operations. The tractor that had started this journey would have a place of honor at the center, fully restored and operational, serving as a reminder that sometimes the most valuable gifts come disguised as burdens, and that love can create legacies that last far beyond a single lifetime. The Foundation's first project was helping Henry Walsh's grandson purchase equipment for his own farming operation. It seemed fitting that the land where Grandpa and Elizabeth's secret had been buried would now help launch the dreams of a new generation. Chapter 11. The Continuing Legacy. 2 years after starting the tractor restoration, I stood in the barn looking at the gleaming John Deere Model B, now fully operational and serving as the centerpiece of a story that had transformed my understanding of family, love, and legacy. The foundation I'd established was thriving, having helped over 50 young farmers and rural entrepreneurs launch or expand their operations. The properties that Grandpa and Elizabeth had purchased together were generating enough income to fund the foundation's activities while still providing substantial returns for future generations. But the most meaningful outcome was the change in my relationship with the family's agricultural heritage. The restoration project had taught me to appreciate the skills, dedication, and vision that farming required, and I'd begun spending more time on the family farm, learning from my relatives who had always been part of that world. I'd also tracked down Elizabeth's children and grandchildren, sharing the story of her love affair with Grandpa and the legacy they'd created together. Her family had been amazed to learn about her secret contributions to the property's success and her lifelong commitment to honoring a love that had been denied by social expectations. The tractor itself had become something of a local legend, with people coming from across the region to see the machine that had unlocked such an extraordinary family secret. I'd started giving talks at antique tractor shows and restoration clubs, sharing the story of how mechanical restoration had led to personal discovery. Most importantly, I'd learned that Grandpa's final gift hadn't been the tractor itself. It had been the opportunity to understand that love, sacrifice, and vision could create legacies that extended far beyond a single generation. The old John Deere still started on the first pull, its engine running with the same steady rhythm that had once comforted Grandpa during his Sunday morning rituals. But now it was more than just a memorial to lost love. It was a symbol of enduring love that had found ways to flourish and create lasting benefits for others. Every time I started that engine, I thought about Grandpa and Elizabeth, and the dreams they'd shared that had ultimately become reality through patience, sacrifice, and the kind of love that puts others' needs before its own. The family had stopped laughing about my inheritance. Now they understood, as I did, that sometimes the most valuable gifts are the ones that require us to work the hardest to understand their true worth. Thank you for listening to this incredible story of restoration, discovery, and the enduring power of love to create legacies that span generations. This tale reminds us that sometimes the most valuable inheritances are the ones that others dismiss as worthless, and that the greatest treasures are often hidden in the most unexpected places. The story of Grandpa's John Deere shows us that restoration isn't just about fixing broken machines. It's about uncovering the stories and dreams that give those machines meaning, and understanding how individual sacrifices can create benefits that last far beyond a single lifetime. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Please let me know what part of the world you're listening from, and share any experiences you've had with restoration projects, family mysteries, or discoveries that changed your understanding of your own heritage. If this story inspired you to look more deeply at the seemingly simple gifts in your own life, please consider subscribing to the channel and sharing it with others. These stories matter because they remind us that love and vision can create legacies that benefit generations, even when the original dreamers never get to see their plans come to fruition. Until next time, remember that the most valuable inheritances often require the most work to understand, and that sometimes what appears to be a burden is actually the key to unlocking extraordinary opportunities.